Justice for Megan, the twin who never woke up, the night everything changed. Before we dive into this true crime documentary about one of America's most shocking murder cases, hit subscribe, because the mystery we're about to uncover is darker than the truth anyone has ever told. The house on Willow Lane was quiet that night. It was the summer of 21, and inside, 17-year-old twins Ben and Megan Elliot had gone to bed in their separate rooms. Their parents, Michael and Kathy, thought it was just another ordinary night in the suburban neighborhood. But within hours, the calm of that home would be shattered forever. Just before dawn, a chilling 911 call pierced through the silence. On the line was Ben. His voice was low, almost whispering, as he told the operator, words no parent should ever hear, "My sister. She's been stabbed." When first responders arrived, they rushed upstairs to find Ben bent over Megan's body, performing chest compressions. Blood stained the room. Megan lay motionless, her life slipping away. Her parents, jolted awake by the commotion, stumbled into the hallway, terrified and confused. "What's happening to our daughter?" they pleaded, but officers held them back. At that moment, police didn't know who inside the house was victim or suspect. The body cam footage later shown in court captured the raw, chaotic moments. Ben's hands pressed desperately on his twin's chest. His parents begged for answers, but the investigators said nothing. They needed to secure the scene, to make sense of the horror they had just walked into. What made this tragedy even more confounding was what Ben said next. He admitted he had stabbed his sister, but then came the claim that stunned everyone, from police to prosecutors to the courtroom. Years later, he insisted he was sleepwalking. He hadn't meant to hurt Megan. He wasn't even aware of what he was doing. To prosecutor, it sounded like a desperate excuse. To the defense, it was the only explanation for something so senseless. The Elliot family's nightmare deepened as detectives began piecing together the case. There was no history of abuse between the twins. In fact, by all accounts, they were inseparable. Megan had been diagnosed as autistic, and Ben was known to be protective of her. Teachers, classmates, and family friends all described their bond as close, even tender. There were no angry text messages, no fights, no signs of resentment or jealousy. Nothing to suggest murder, so how could a brother who loved his sister so deeply take her life? Experts called to review the case turned to the rare phenomenon of parasomnia, a category of sleep disorders that can include sleepwalking, sleep eating, and even violent actions carried out unconsciously. Some pointed out that people have been known to drive cars, cook meals, even wander miles from home in their sleep. But killing a sibling, that was something far more disturbing. The prosecution argued that Ben's own words unraveled his story. He told police he remembered stabbing Megan. Their expert claimed that someone in a true sleepwalking episode wouldn't recall details like that. The defense countered with their own specialists, saying fragments of memory could surface, even in states between deep sleep and waking. The questions multiplied. Did Megan wake up during the attack and try to defend herself? Did she startle him, breaking through the fog of his sleep state? Or was this something darker, something deliberate? Even more troubling was Ben's demeanor. His voice during the 911 call struck many as unsettling. Too soft, too detached for someone who had just discovered his twin covered in blood. Prosecutors seized on this, reenacting his whispered tone in front of jurors, suggesting it showed calculation rather than panic. Yet when reporters later interviewed him in jail, they found he spoke the same way, softly, with little outward emotion. His parents swore that was simply his nature. By the end of that terrible night, Megan was gone, Ben was taken into custody, and a family who had once been whole was suddenly broken in two, grieving for a daughter they had lost and terrified for the son they still had. The investigation was only beginning. Prosecutors believed they were facing a cold-blooded teenage killer. The defense insisted it was a tragic accident born from a disorder beyond his control. And as the case made its way into court, one chilling question loomed over everyone. Was Ben Elliot asleep when he killed his twin, or wide awake? Inside the case, evidence versus explanation. By the time sunrise hit the Elliot home, detectives had sealed off the hallway with yellow tape and begun the painstaking work of documenting the scene. Photographs, measurements, swabs, the knife in its sheath, every item logged and bagged. For investigators, the story had to be rebuilt from silence, There were no cameras, no eyewitnesses, only a brother, a sister, and a few terrible minutes no one could replay. Ben was escorted to the station for questioning. On the interrogation video, later shown in court, he sat neatly, speaking in that same soft, even tone heard on the 911 call. At moments, he drifted to unrelated topics, the SAT, school plans, as if his mind were searching for any place but the one he'd landed. To some, that detachment read as chilling. To others, it looked like shock, a shutdown in the face of the unthinkable. When asked directly, Ben said he had stabbed his sister and that he had been sleepwalking. He said he couldn't accept it at first, that his mind tried to push away what happened. While police worked the house, Megan's parents, Michael and Kathy, called a family friend who was an attorney, trying to understand what to do when your home suddenly becomes a crime scene. Prosecutors would later point to that call as suspicious, suggesting a coordinated story. The family insisted it was simple panic and confusion. They wanted information. They wanted help. Mostly they wanted to know whether their daughter was still alive. Detectives dug through phones, text histories, and social media, looking for feuds, threats, or patterns that might explain a deadly break between twins. They found nothing. No hostile messages, no escalating conflict, no digital breadcrumb suggesting the night was planned. Friends and teachers described a protective brother and a close bond. If there was a motive, it wasn't on the devices or in the open, so the center of gravity shifted to sleep. The defense's path hinged on parasomnia, the family of disorders that can cause people to walk, talk, eat, even undertake complex actions while not fully awake. Sleep specialists agreed on basic science. True sleepwalking occurs during non-REM, slow-wave sleep, a twilight zone between sleeping and waking. But beyond that, the agreement stopped. The state's expert argued that true sleepwalking doesn't leave pockets of memory. If Ben remembered stabbing, he must have been awake. He also suggested that elements of the act, like unsheathing a knife, required too much conscious intention to fit a parasomnia episode. And he floated a theory about a pillow found near Megan. Perhaps it had been used to muffle sound, which could explain why there was less projected blood on the wall than the state expected. To the prosecution, that pillow spoke to intent. The defense countered with its own specialist. Yes, parasomnia is rare, but not imaginary. People can perform complicated sequences while in a disordered state of arousal, and memory can be fragmented, brief flashes surfacing as someone moves in and out of deeper sleep. As for the pillow, the defense said Ben used it in a frantic attempt to staunch bleeding, not to silence. Two experts, two frameworks, and a case that hinged on which sounded more credible to 12 citizens. Then came demeanor. The prosecutor reenacted Ben's whisper in court, inviting jurors to hear calculation in the softness. Reporters who later met Ben described the same subdued voice, a manner of speaking that, according to his family, was simply his nature. But courtrooms don't measure people against their usual selves. They measure them against a moment of crisis. Jurors had to decide whether his calm was self-control or shock. The body cam footage added more texture and more questions. It showed Ben attempting compressions, parents distraught, and asking officers what had happened. Police withheld details in those first minutes, a standard step to keep stories from cross-pollinating before interviews. To the family, it felt cruel. To investigators, it was procedure. Piece by piece, a narrative war formed. No motive versus no memory. A close sibling bond versus the reality of fatal wounds. A pillow as a tourniquet versus a tool for silence. Even the absence of digital research on sleepwalking became a data point. If Ben were faking, the state argued, wouldn't he have Googled a defense? By closing arguments, the room held two incompatible truths. One side said a young man had intentionally killed his twin, then shaped a story. The other said a young man had done the unthinkable, in a state he could not control and could barely recall. The law demanded a single answer. When the jurors finally filed out to deliberate, they carried competing maps of the same night. Science that didn't agree with itself, behavior that could be read two ways, and a family's grief pulling in both directions at once. The verdict and aftermath. The jury filed back into the courtroom after hours of tense deliberation. For days they had been caught between two versions of the same night, one of a calculated teenage killer, the other of a boy trapped in a rare and terrifying sleep disorder. When the foreperson stood and delivered the verdict, guilty of first-degree murder, The weight of the decision settled not only on Ben Elliot, but on an entire family whose lives had already been fractured. Initially, the jurors had been divided, 7 voting guilty and 5 not guilty. But after hours of reviewing testimony, body cam footage, and the clashing expert opinions, they reached a unanimous decision. Prosecutors emphasized the number of wounds, including one deep stab that suggested intent. They highlighted Ben's calm demeanor, his quiet tone, his failure to call out for his parents. And in their closing argument, they drove home one chilling thought. We may not know the motive, but you never know what goes on behind closed doors. For the defense, the blow was devastating. They had argued fiercely that this was a case without motive, without warning signs, without a shred of animosity between siblings. They urged jurors to see the possibility of parasomnia, to consider that Ben's fragmented memory and disoriented state could reflect sleepwalking rather than cold calculation. But in the end, the jury believed intent outweighed doubt. The sentence came next. Prosecutors asked for 40 years. The law allowed it, but the judge chose differently. After considering the unusual circumstances, Ben's young age, and the pleas for mercy, he handed down 15 years in prison. It meant Ben could be eligible for parole in 2032, still only 28 years old. For the Elliot parents, it was a bitter paradox. They had lost a daughter forever, yet still faced the possibility of their son returning home one day. Outside the courtroom, the family's devastation was plain. Michael and Kathy held hands through interviews, describing the unbearable strain of losing one child while fearing for another. They rejected any notion of a cover-up, saying all they ever wanted was to understand what had really happened in that bedroom. We miss Megan every single day, Kathy said, and we worry about Ben every single day too. The broader questions lingered long after the trial closed. Could sleepwalking really explain such violence? Did the science support the possibility, or had the defense stretched a disorder to fit an unthinkable crime? Even among experts, no consensus emerged. Some said Ben's memory fragments proved he was awake. Others said fragments can exist in twilight states of consciousness. What remained clear was that the jury had chosen certainty where science still held uncertainty. For the public, the case left a haunting impression. A brother who admitted to killing his twin, a defense that hinged on actions performed in the fog of sleep, parents torn between grief and loyalty, and a community left asking the same question investigators first faced when they entered the Elliot home. Was this tragedy a deliberate act, or an accident born in the shadows of the mind? Ben Elliot sits in prison today, appealing his conviction. Megan's memory lives on in the hearts of her family, and the Elliot parents, hand in hand, continue to navigate a future no family should have to face, mourning a daughter while waiting for the day their son might walk free. If you thought this true crime story was chilling, just wait until the next case. We're diving even deeper into America's darkest mysteries, shocking murder cases, and unsolved crimes that will keep you awake at night. Make sure you hit subscribe now, before the shadows of the next story find you first.